Hi! So today we are going to work on a blob drawing. We are going to use color and form and shape to design a character. And we're going to think about the colors and what they mean and how they can express feelings. So you have read or listened to the story, The Color Monster. And in that story, it really gave us some good ideas of how color can really help us express our feelings and communicate how we're feeling or how a character might be feeling, like those monsters. And you're going to start off with a blob. And there's a couple ways we can make our blobs, and I'll go over that later. You're going to start out with a blob, and then you're going to use markers or crayons or pencils and create a character monster from your blob. So you can see, here's one example. I'll show these again in a little bit, a little closer up. And here's another example of a monster blob that I've done. And you can see where the blob started out and where then I added my own details to my character. So let's get started and I'll show you how we can make our blob monsters. All right, so today we're gonna make a monster character out of an ink blob. So for this, I made two examples just to share with you. It's quite fun. We're going to design a blob of ink, or we could do it with watercolor, or if you don't have either of those things, you could take a black marker or a black crayon and ask a friend or a brother or sister or an adult to just draw a funny shape, a blob shape, and color it in, and then give it to you to figure out how you're going to make your monster. And you'll see how that will work a little bit more in a minute. But I wanted to share with you my examples. Here I have this design, this monster character. You can see the ink blob that I started with just had this. And I kind of turned the paper around different ways to see what I could imagine making out of that blob. And this is what I came up with. Now, in addition to creating your monster design, you're also going to include some color patterns to him or her to show how your monster is feeling based on the story you watched just a few minutes ago, The Color Monster. And in that story, they talked about different colors and how different colors can represent different feelings. So your monster can represent your feelings that you're having, or you can design your monster with his own or her own feelings, maybe in connection to the character that he or she is in your head. Here's another example of one that I made. You can see he turned out a little larger. This ink blob kind of went a little further. I must have had more ink on my paper. Don't worry, the paper I'm using is just kind of cheap computer paper, so it'll wrinkle a little if you end up using the ink or the watercolor. Don't worry about that too much. And you can see again, I kind of turned around my ink blob a little bit just to see what I could imagine coming out of that ink blob, and this is what I came up with. So I added the monster's head. I loved using this negative space in the blob to create his mouth and tongue being open really wide. I wanted to show that he was happy. He's wearing a hat, so his hat makes him happy. They talked about yellow being a happy color. His hat brings him joy, and so he's joyful, feeling happy with his hat and his flowers. And this one, he's feeling a little blue, right? I used the blue, a little sad but also a little happy. But he's sad because he loves to wear his pink shoes, and everyone tells him his pink shoes are just too crazy. So he feels a little sad, and that's just sort of the character development that I'm starting to think about with my monster in this one. So you can come up with your own ideas. Your materials you'll need is a piece of paper. You'll need, there's a couple ways we can use the ink. I'm using ink. This is permanent ink. It's something you should use with an adult supervision if you have it. If you don't have it, you could use watercolor, black watercolors, and do the same process. Or, like we talked about a minute ago, you can hand your paper to someone in your home, give them a crayon or a black crayon or a black marker, and have them just draw a strange blob for you and then hand it back to you, and that can be what you start with to create your monster. You'll also need a pencil or a thinner black pen and some markers. I have Sharpies. Of course, you don't need Sharpies. You can use any type of markers you have in your art supplies. So that's where we are going to start, and I'll be back shortly to show you the process. All right, so I'm starting with my blank paper. I'm going to take my ink. You are going to either use ink with adult supervision, or you're going to use a watercolor, black watercolor, to create your blob this same way, or you're giving your paper to a friend to draw a blob for you or a family member. So I'm just going to put a little bit of ink or watercolor on my paper, and I'm actually going to use my breath to blow it into different shapes. Blow it around the paper. You don't want to blow it so hard that it leaves the paper. So if you get to an edge, you want to turn it and maybe head it a different direction. Good. Once you think you've got kind of an interesting design going, I'm kind of enjoying that with all these little kind of fingers coming out. I'm not sure what those will become, but I do need to let it dry. So I'm going to let it dry, and then we'll come back and finish it off. All right. So now my ink is dry, or if you used a black watercolor, you're going to need to let it dry. But if somebody drew it with a black pen for you, a blob, like we talked about, you can just get started. So what I like to do is take my blob and I like to turn it different directions and kind of see if I can imagine a character coming out of this blob. I love this. All these little drips coming out of him. And I kind of see something happening here. I'm noticing this negative space could maybe be his nose. And I'm just going to start drawing. And make some eyes. Maybe some crooked one. He is a monster, you know. you could see, hopefully, how I just started using the space left over by the blob to create my space and my new character using line. I started with a black marker, but then I went in and I decided to make some choices with color to show my monster's emotions. So he's wearing a pink bow tie, and that shows how happy and joyful he's feeling. I can kind of see his joy in his mouth, even though he has sharp teeth. He looks joyful, but I added also a little, sometimes we can have two emotions at once. And so I added a little bit of green to his hair to show, even though his hair is wild, he is feeling calm and happy. And you can continue building some scenery around your monster, like I started doing with this one, some background. He's standing on a grassy park area. That's up to you. You can make those creative choices as you go along and even write a story about your character. So have a great time. Enjoy using line and color to create your monster character, and think about using your color to show what kind of emotions is your monster feeling.